So I've been waiting patiently to discuss this particular story um, because I wanted to give the legacy media, the mainstream media, including allegedly uh, more conservative outlets such as Fox News or others, to really kind of hone in on this particular case. The reason that I waited so long wasn't because I wasn't aware, or isn't because I wasn't aware of the story, but because I didn't want to jump in on it preemptively thinking that no one was going to cover it. Now, the story that I'm talking about has been covered by some. A lot of times it's been covered by people who are marginalized because they're considered to be biased or have an agenda. Frankly, everybody has an agenda. There's no such thing as a news outlet or a media source these days that doesn't have an agenda. I think of Tim Pool from Timcast, probably one of the more neutral sources out there. But I think if you were to watch him, he would flat out tell you that he has an agenda. Everybody does. And Tim tends to be a little bit more on the left-hand side of the spectrum than I do. But that being said, I've just not seen anybody in mainstream media really cover this particular story. And so, what story is that? Back during the Minneapolis riots, not just protests, but during the Minneapolis riots, Hope Walz, the daughter of Governor or Commissar Tim Walz, was caught, if you will, tweeting out what should have been closely guarded information about National Guard movements. Now, I'm not saying that she was tweeting out actual locations and deployment times and actual movements, but she was really kind of not trying to quell any activity. She was kind of encouraging the activity of the protesters slash rioters slash miscreants slash criminal thugs slash revolutionaries. Yeah, I meant all of that. One of the things that was happening was that people were kind of stirring up people to get to action faster. And one person on May 27th tweeted out, "Urgent, if you are at the protest, get out now. National Guard and SWAT en route. They're almost here and will be using city buses to arrest everyone. As many as possible. Get everyone out. Screenshot, retweet, and share this." Hope then replied on the next day or not replied, but tweeted out the next day that how do I want to say this? She was assuaging fears that the protesters had and the rioters had any chance of being shut down by saying the Guard cannot be sent in within minutes. It takes time for them to deploy because they come from all over the state. To be clear, the National Guard will not be present tonight. Now, how does Hope Walz know this? And why is Hope Walz being made privy to that information? And what business does she have telling the rioters, telling the criminals, telling the miscreants, telling the Marxist revolutionaries that they don't have anything to be afraid of? That is a subversive tactic. Go ahead, do what you're going to do. You guys are fine. There aren't going to be enough law enforcement officials on the streets, law enforcement officers on the streets to stop you. Do what you're going to do. And she then, subsequent to that tweet, tweeted out, could someone who actually has followers relay to the masses that have gotten National Guard training that the Guard will not be present tonight. There is a lot of misinformation that is further spreading fear and chaos at the scene of the protest. She's honing in on this. She's making sure that they know they have nothing to fear. She doesn't want them to be afraid of consequences for bad action. And to be clear, the National Guard was deployed eventually, but it wasn't deployed to deal with the actual peaceful mourners over the death of George Floyd. The National Guard was deployed to deal with the revolutionaries. And that's what they were. They're the people in Minneapolis, for the most part, largely were cultural revolutionaries. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, the Black Panther Party, the Black Power movement, all of them. They're cultural revolutionaries. They are soldiers for cultural change. Their one goal in all of this is to bring about a Marxist overthrow of society. And she was letting them know they could go ahead. The National Guard wasn't there to target peaceful mourners who were gathering around the scene of the death of George Floyd. They were there to stop people from killing, maiming one another, and from destroying more private property and public property. That was it. That's why they were there. And Hope Walz was aiding and abetting the enemies of the state of Minnesota and the federal government, the United States of America. But she wasn't alone. She was partnering with, this is going to come as a great big surprise, Isra Hirsi. Isra Hirsi is the daughter of, wait for it, Ilhan Omar, Representative Ilhan Omar. She represents the 5th District, which covers Minneapolis and a lot of other areas surrounding Minneapolis. She tweeted out through the Twin Cities DSA account, or retweeted the Twin Cities DSA account, want to help your comrades, notice the use of that language, want to help your comrades protesting at the 3rd Precinct at Lake and Minnehaha? Here's a good list of much needed supplies, except for milk. Water is always better for eye washing than milk. Please don't bring milk. It's first aid stuff, band-aids, gauze, things like that. This is Isra Hirsi. She's a radical subversive as well, just like her mom. She's learned from her mother, who learned from others, as I spoke of in a previous video about the Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. Her response to the person who put her on blast for this, I use some contemporary language there. This person said Ilhan Omar's daughter retweeted a list of needed supplies for comrades who are rioting in Minneapolis. The Twin Cities DSA asked her plywood, sticks, rackets, and more. Yep, they did. Isra Hirsi retweeted that, and then she defended herself by saying, yes, I'm an empathetic person, sue me. Look, I'm not going to get into a conversation about empathy right now. I'll say this, I hate empathy. Empathy is not a legitimate thing. There's a big difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is a useful emotional tool. Empathy is a pretty much recent invention of left-wing psycho, left-wing psychos, but it's really meant to kind of force people into identifying with someone, to feel their pain, as one famous theologian has said recently, you kind of, instead of rescuing someone from drowning, you jump in and drown with them so you can identify with the pain of their drowning. So I'm not going to get any further into it than that, but she's not an empathetic person. Pathetic maybe, but not empathetic, or empathic, if you will. She's also aiding and abetting, and the use, and here's why I say that, and here's why I've referenced so much this being a cultural revolution by Marxists and leftist progressives. The use of the term comrades, want to help out your comrades protesting at the 3rd Precinct, that is clearly language of the Marxist communist parties that have existed in the United States for a very long time. But worse than that, or not worse, but congruent to that is the language of every Marxist communist nation today. It was a language of the terminology of the Soviet Union. It was the language and terminology of the Bolshevik Revolution, where the ruling elite, if you will, the monarchy, were eventually overthrown, and the democratic government driven out of Russia, and the Soviet Union then used that to increase its power. It's the language of the Chinese Communist Party. It's the language of every communist country in the world. Comrade, the workers. And it's incredibly telling to see that in someone like Isra Hirsi. And there again, as I've talked about in another video about Ilhan, specifically, Isra's growing up in the lap of luxury because of her mother, who came here and has taken advantage of every American freedom, every American liberty, every American advantage. And she's now, like her mother, advocating for defending and supporting, aiding and abetting the enemies of the state, of the people, of the Constitution of the United States. And so here we have Hope and Isra working in tandem, working hand in hand to offer aid and comfort to the enemy. If let's pretend this was some sort of right-wing white nationalist movement that was driving the activity of the riots in Minneapolis, and they were targeting minorities, and let's say child of, or the offspring of, some white member of the House of Representatives or some other person in a governmental position, an elected position, were to tweet out, hey, my brothers, you need to be aware that you're free to operate. For now, the National Guard is not going to be able to come out and stop you. That person would be suffering hellish retribution of some sort, if not arrested. Isra and Hope should have been arrested. Not to silence their freedom of speech. They have a right to say anything they want to say in support of whatever political position they're taking. They have that freedom. They have a right to advocate for peaceful assembly and peaceable assembly of people searching for a redress of grievances that's embodied in the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. What they don't have a right to do, what they don't have freedom to do, is advocate for or defend criminal activity or rebellious activity. Now, there does come a time in the course of every nation, the need for rebellion, for not revolutionary action, but rebellion, for civil disobedience. What they were doing was not defending civil disobedience. It was defending and aiding and comforting and giving tactical information, and in the case of Isra, trying to spur on people to offer supplies in this culturally violent revolution by Marxists in the Minneapolis Twin Cities area. That's criminal. No one else would be allowed to get away with that. But just like the rioters and the violent protesters in that area during that time, just like the people who took over the Capitol Hill district of Seattle, and just like the people who in Portland who are continuing to riot and destroy buildings 50 plus days later, with little resistance from governing authorities in Oregon, or without the governing authorities in Oregon now protesting against federal intervention for protecting federal buildings, no one's going to do anything about this. No one's going to do anything about hope, offering aid and comfort to the enemy. No one's going to do anything about Isra Hirsi offering or trying to incite aid and comfort to a riotous behavior. Because, and bear with me, because everyone who's in a position of power in the state of Minnesota right now, who really has the power in the state of Minnesota, are fully on board with what's been going on. And so we need to be aware of that. And we need to recognize that the juxtaposition between once peaceful protesters who were protesting and rallying against the governor's overreach when it comes to COVID-19 responses were labeled by the media as right-wing radicals, white nationalists, Nazi sympathizers, criminal, I mean literally criminal protesters, if you will, peaceful protesters in the governor's mansion and at the Capitol grounds in the Twin Cities were called criminal because they were violating the governor's stay-at-home orders. They were all criminal. Now, you fast forward to the riots and the protests over George Floyd's death, and those people were called heroes. They were called patriots. They were called, what was the other word? I can't even think of it right now. It's not all that important. The advocacy was for them. They were the ones destroying property. They were the ones threatening the lives of people, and sometimes not just threatening. There were people who didn't take the right position, who were genuinely harmed for being where they were, and the media said nothing about it. The media could barely be bothered to utter even so much as a squeak about the violence that was being done, other than to, as Isra said, to offer sympathy. That's pathetic. That's disgusting. And once again, you have to understand this is the agenda. They will marginalize you as an individual for speaking out. They will come at you as an individual for speaking out. Why? Because they do not want any voice of dissent that doesn't go with the Marxist radical agenda of the leftist progressives that are attempting to take over this country right now. And you can call me a conspiracy theorist if you want. You can think I'm crazy and wearing a tinfoil hat or building a bunker somewhere, as I was recently accused of. Or think that somehow I believe that Russia's going to invade the Midwest, as I was also recently accused of. But you have to open your eyes and see this. The media is not friendly to this. The powers that be are not friendly to us. They are offering aid and comfort to those who would destroy the way of life in the United States. And I'm not talking about no reforms at all. I'm just saying they want to see the way the United States has become the nation that it has destroyed. They want to completely rebuild this country, and they are not going to hold accountable anybody who agrees with them. Hope Walz is untouchable because her daddy is who he is. Isra Hirsi is untouchable because her mama is untouchable. Keith Ellison's son, who has sworn allegiance to Antifa, is untouchable because of who his daddy is. And they think they're oppressed. They think that somehow they are the downtrodden. They have no idea. As always, thanks for watching the video. Thanks for being open-minded. Thanks for listening. I would ask that over here in the corner, somewhere on your screen, you hit the subscribe button. It's important, not for me, but because mainstream media, legacy media, isn't going to get the word out. They're not going to let people who don't toe the established line speak. So for the sake of liberty and for the sake of the defense of this nation, small little independent voices like mine need to be heard, especially the interviews. It's got very little to do with my commentary and a lot more to do with the interviews and the people who are affected when liberties are tread on. So once again, hit the subscribe button, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.